Haworth, New Jersey. Although it is a somewhat small Bergen County borough, it is big in history, big in community spirit, and big in its commitment to residential life. Haworth is founded upon very rich soil, where many beautiful homes have been built, and an abundance of trees have been planted that have decorated the streets for many years. Hi, I'm Maria Eichler, and in this edition of Looking Back, we'll retrace some 300 years of history and explore what took place in Haworth's establishment, development, and growth that has made it the premier borough you see today. When we return, we'll begin our journeys with the first Dutch settlers and their encounters with the American Indian tribes. So don't go away. Looking Back Haworth after these messages. Looking back to the early 17th century, the Haworth area was mainly a mass of farmland that was nurtured and cultivated by the Lenape Indians. Although there is not much on record regarding the Lenape, we do know that they were instrumental in supplying the first white settlers with food and necessities. Later, during the 1600s, this area was known as Schralenland, which translated means gravel land. One of the reasons it was called Schralenland was due to its main roadway, Schralenberg Road, which was once an Indian trail between the Hackensack and Tappan areas. The Lenape Indians were originally from the Hackensack village, which existed just southwest of the Haworth area. In their pursuit to broaden their community, the Indians became the very first settlers in this area, and for a while they enjoyed the peace and tranquility of their new home. That didn't last very long, because soon after the Indians settled, white men of Dutch descent began their journey north from Paulus Hook, which is now known as Jersey City. Once the white men arrived, there was a great dispute over the land, which led to an Indian massacre in 1643. Those Indians and Dutchmen that survived this massacre eventually began a joint settlement of the land. It has been reported that across the hill from Schralenberg Road was once the site of an ancient Indian burial ground. Not long ago, a skeleton was discovered of what may have been an Indian maiden from pre-colonial days. Other than these few things, the Indians didn't leave much more of their culture behind when they finally left the area. There was a mural painted by Eugene Cole to illustrate what life may have been like when the Indians lived here. His portrayal, called Years Ago, is as accurate of a picture of those days as research could make. The mural can be seen in the Haworth Elementary School. In the 17th century, the Haworth area was known as the Hackensack Valley. In 1675, one of the first settlers in the Hackensack Valley was Albert Zabriskie. Zabriskie later became one of the largest landholders in Bergen County. Another settler who was also attracted to the area was a man named John Berry. Berry encouraged settlement in the Hackensack Valley, and because of his ideas, many others like the Kips, Hoppers, Bogerts, and Demerists wanted to become a part of it. David Demarest Sr. became a very big part of settling the Hackensack Valley. He actually started the first white settlement, which basically meant buying and trading land. Demarest purchased his tract of land east of the Hackensack River, which included parts of Dumont and Bergenfield and all of Haworth. With his purchase, he promised to get 40 Huguenot families from Europe to come settle on this land. Many Huguenot families did come to Demarest land. Unfortunately, though, not many settled there. As a result, John Berry, who originally had claim on the Demarest land, fought to get it back, and he did. At the turn of the 18th century, this land became more and more popular among the Dutch and Huguenot families, including the Dory family. John Dory, who built one of the first homes in Haworth, settled west of the Hackensack River, and the Dutch continued their settlement throughout the first half of the century. Due to its extended growth, the Hackensack Valley became part of Harrington Township in 1775. This township was one of the oldest subdivisions in Bergen County. John Dory was one of the founding fathers of Haworth, and in 1718, he built the original Dory House on the north part of the Haworth Cloister lands. In those days, most Dutch and French homes were constructed of sandstone or mud mortar that was mixed with straw and pig's hair. A very interesting combination. A few years after Dorey built his original home, he purchased 234 acres of additional land on the west side of Schwalenberg Road. Thus, settlement continued on and during the Revolutionary War. It has been recorded that no major battles were fought in the Harrington Township or the Schwalenberg areas, but there were a few raids on the settlers. These raids did nothing more than inconvenience the settlers' progress of cultivating their land. One important area of Haworth during the war was Schwalenberg Road. Schwalenberg Road served as an inland road for colonial communication. General Washington could easily send and receive messages between the North and South by way of Schwalenberg Road. General Washington also used Schwalenberg Road to lead his troops down south to triumph over rebel forces. A very humorous incident took place during the Revolutionary War. John Dorey wanted his 15-year-old son to enlist in the military, but his son refused. As a form of rebellion, John Jr. hid in a tree and waited for the colonial soldiers to pass. Once they passed by, he slung-shot rocks at them. The soldiers responded by attacking, but they couldn't find their attacker. John Sr., however, knew what his son was up to, and he retaliated by giving John Jr. an old-fashioned spanking. Don't go away, there's more Looking Back Haworth after these messages. The 1800s were probably the most important years of Haworth's history. During this time, town development was going strong. The first 6 houses were built between 1782 and 1818, and a few of them are still standing today, like this one built by John Dorey. 20 or so years later, Harrington Township split, and the western half became Washington Township. After the split, the area was separated into boroughs. They called this borough fever, which yielded 8 subdivisions, one of which was Haworth. Surprisingly, the name Haworth is not a Dutch name, but an English name. It is believed that Haworth is related to Haworth, England, where the Bronte sisters lived, the famous novelists. Evidence to support this story is that a street in Haworth, named Harland Avenue, was named in honor of Marion Harland, a writer. Marion Harland made many visits to Haworth, England. Consequently, she wrote a book about the Bronte sisters and her trips to gain more information about them. Because of her interest in Haworth, there seems to be some relation between the two towns. There is no certainty where the name Haworth was first used. However, the name was found on a map in the mid-1800s. In the late 1880s, many important developments took place in Haworth. In 1883, the first passenger train ran through Haworth to Tappan, New York. It took 20,000 laborers 2 years to complete this railroad. Unfortunately, 1 year later, the railroad went bankrupt. It was soon bought by New York Central, and in 1894, the Haworth train station was opened. Mary Lou Boyd, Haworth's historian, shares her insight on how important the railroad was to Haworth's development.
Well, I think the nicest part about Haworth was when the railroad came through. That really started people coming into the town. Realtors would advertise that these lovely forests and streets and tree-lined places in Haworth were the best place to live in this area, and that they would have an opportunity to ride the train back into the city where most people worked in the city. So when the railroad came, that really opened up the town. Now there's a little wooden bridge that crosses the railroad track. Mr. Zabriskie built the house over on Massachusetts Avenue, and he had a very large farm with a lot of cows on it. And when they built the railroad through town, they had to cut out down into the part of the ground to make the railroad, and that was too steep for his horses to come back, or his cows to come back home at night for milking. So he built this little wooden bridge across the railroad track so his cows could come home at night. One humorous story about the railroad, most women drove their husbands to the range station, and it became quite a habit. Every morning, get up. They never got dressed. They just throw on a bathrobe with their curlers, and they'd hop in the car and drive their husband to the station. And one morning, this lady got in the car, and she drove her husband to the station. When she turned around to kiss him goodbye, he wasn't there. She forgot him and left him home.
The railroad continued its operation until 1959. And while it was around, it did bring many developers to Haworth. One of the developers was the Haworth Improvement Company, which issued Haworth's first map in 1888. This map was used to give people an idea of what areas they wanted to buy land. The Haworth Improvement Company was later taken over by the Franklin Society, a New York savings and loan association. The Franklin Society took development very seriously. They printed a brochure called Haworth, with a quote that said, "Haworth is being carefully developed as a high-class residential town, upon ideas that exclude all features that could offend the sensibilities of a quiet, home-loving American citizen." With this brochure, many people came and bought land and began building homes. They wanted this high-class lifestyle. Another major developer, and the largest in Haworth, was the Boston Land Company. This company disposed of 3,000 20 by 100-foot lots by advertising in the New York newspapers. These ads encouraged people to hop on the train to Haworth and go seek out this land. The Boston Land Company was very successful in developing Haworth. As a result, much land was bought and many homes were built. Another great accomplishment in Haworth was the construction of the spring. Mary Lou tells us how the spring supplied water to the new homes from 1890 to 1923.
I'm at one of my favorite spots in Haworth, the original spring that supplied water to all the homes in Haworth from 1890 to 1923. The spring was covered up over many years by shrubs, bamboo, and all kinds of growth. And it was only just a year or two ago that my husband and I came down here and found the spring again. And we have surrounded it by stone and brick and have dug down, and you can come down today and see the water bubbling up out of the stone. The spring supplied water to Haworth, and on a Sunday morning they had built a pump house over the spring, and the water was pumped up to the tank hill where there was a big tank on top of the hill, and it took all day to fill up the tank, and then after it was full, then centrifugal force and gravity would supply the water to the homes.
By 1900, there were 37 homes built in Haworth. The area was soon becoming a real community. Therefore, in 1903, a committee of residents initiated a bill to make Haworth its own separate borough. A year later, in 1904, the bill was passed, and Haworth was incorporated as a borough. When we come back, we'll see how the community growth of the early 1900s has made Haworth the first-class town that it is today. Welcome back. During the 1900s, there were a number of firsts for Haworth. The first mayor, policeman, post office, meat market, grocery store, firehouse, and church. These establishments became the backbone of Haworth's pride and its commitment to its community. As the population of Haworth continued to grow in the early 1900s, it was necessary to add some structures to the town. Mary Lou Boyd tells of the first firehouse, policeman, and schools.
There were some homes in Haworth that burned down, and we didn't have a fire department, so a group of men in Haworth organized the Haworth Fire Department, and they used the tank at the top of Tank Hill to fill up their pumper. And before we had electric engines, they used to take the pumper to the fires by horse and wagon. Then the first firehouse was at the top of Schralenberg Road. That was in 1910. And then they built the firehouse over on Hardenberg Avenue in 1924, I believe. And then that left fire engines only on one side of town with the railroad track dividing us. And when a train would come by, the fire engine couldn't get across onto the west side of town. So then they built another firehouse in 1954 on Park Street. Our first policeman was Eugene Pop Weiss. They called him Pop Weiss. I believe he was the fireman in 1910. And he was a truant officer. He took care of the parks, which meant he had to clean up after the horses every day. He raised and lowered the flag. He was the driver of the fire engine during the day, and he did all of this on foot. Then our second, they finally realized that they needed someone that would drive around town, so they put an ad in the newspaper for someone to come and be the policeman, but he had to have a motorcycle, and he would use that motorcycle, and that was when Ed Menzie applied for the job, and he was hired to be our second policeman. As many families moved into town, they had children, and there was a need for schools. So they built the first school on the corner of Haworth Avenue and Valley Road. It was a yellow schoolhouse, and it burned down. And within a few months, they had built a second schoolhouse, a much larger schoolhouse. That school also burned down. And then they built the third schoolhouse. It was a brick schoolhouse, and it was a big contest in Haworth about whether to build another school or not because of the cost of it, and it won by 6 votes. So we have our third schoolhouse, and then in 1954, they built our fourth schoolhouse, which is on Valley Road now.
William T. McCullough became the first mayor of Haworth in 1905. McCullough was also the first person in Haworth to own an automobile. By keeping up with the Joneses, many other residents in Haworth soon bought cars, as well as property to build stores and businesses. By 1913, when Frank C. Osmer Sr. was mayor, many of these businesses were opened. The first few grocery stores opened, and a year later, the post office opened on Terrace Street.
The first building that you come to on Terrace Street is a big stucco building, which housed the police station, the fire department, and a variety of other stores, a grocery store, the library was there, we had a coffee shop, a hamburger joint, and then it's now owned by another family, and it's a private business. Farther up the street, we had the first post office, which was built in 1914. And that building housed the post office facilities and barber shops and all kinds of other stores. And farther up is another store. This was Dunn's Candy Shop. Great place to go between school at lunchtime. You'd buy your candy. And the next house or store was the Taylors, Kaufman's Tailors, and then Joe Garino's meat store. And Joe Garino was famous for his meats. Everybody would come from surrounding towns to come and buy his meats, and he expanded that and finally made it into a grocery store where you could buy packaged foods and milk and bread.
Not only did the Haworth residents enjoy the convenience of having their own grocery store, markets, and post office nearby, but they also appreciated their choices of worship. In 1908, the original First Congregational Church was built. And in 1962, a new one was built that exists today. After World War I, the First Congregational Church purchased a community house for $1. This house consisted of 3 buildings, a stage for plays and dances, a kitchen, and a building that was used as a social hall. In 1920, the St. Luke's Episcopal Church was built, but it was destroyed. A new one was built in 1957. On Park Street in 1914, the Sacred Heart Catholic Church was built, and a new one was built in 1976. Other than church services and school, the children in Haworth used their imaginations and local resources for recreation.
Okay, when I was growing up in Haworth, I always felt that Haworth was my own personal playground because it had 4 brooks that ran through the town where you could wade, catch frogs and pollywogs, and just explore. It had the golf course with sand traps, so we had our own sandbox. It had lots of open fields and wooded areas, and I was a great one for climbing trees as I was growing up, so I was in almost every tree in town. We had our tennis courts where that go way back with the Labor Day tournaments, and we played tennis. One of our favorite pastimes in the summer was to hang out in the police station, and we would sit around the council table and just hang out and talk and play music. We also would hang out in the railroad station because on a cold day they had a pot-bellied stove in there, and that would keep you real warm. So we would hang out in there and slide around on the benches that were attached to the wall.
Today, Haworth is surrounded by a number of beautiful landmarks, one of which is the White Beaches Golf and Country Club that was originally established in 1902. Though the first two clubs were burned down, White Beaches, a private club, still exists on the west side of Haworth. One of the most remembered functions at White Beaches was the fireworks display every 4th of July that entertained the residents of Haworth. Another impressive place for golf is the Haworth Golf and Racquet Club. This semi-private club offers 18 holes of golf on very peaceful and beautiful grounds. Just steps away from the reservoir on the west side of Haworth is the Haworth Water Treatment Plant. The original plant was built in 1964, and it treated 15 million gallons of water per day. In 1989, the plant expanded, cleaning 200 million gallons of water a day. The plant is owned by the Hackensack Water Company, which supplies water to most of Bergen and Hudson counties. This treatment plant, along with some of the other fine establishments in Haworth, show much of the pride and dedication that lie in this town. Mayor John DeRienzo shares why Haworth is so pleasing to its residents.
We originally came to Haworth because at that point we had two very young children, and we're looking for a town where the children could grow and enjoy and prosper. I very much like working with youth, and as a result of that, my time has been spent being the Cub Master, soccer coach, as well as a baseball coach. By being involved with the children of the community, it keeps me in touch with the younger residents and also in touch with those people who are in their 20s who have come back into the town. What I'm delighted about is those people who return to Haworth after college or find jobs in the area, then volunteer their time to work with the youth of the town. All of the various groups and organizations have done a fantastic job working with the various groups within the town. For example, the tennis committee has clinics for the children. The library has library hours for the children. The school has special after-school programs. The sports programs, which include soccer, basketball, baseball, and softball for the girls, has been absolutely outstanding. And the scouting program is really, really one of the best in Bergen County. So to me, if you really enjoy people and you love the town that you're in, volunteer, because we can always use more. The Recreation Commission, the Ambulance Corps, the Fire Department, that's what makes a town. This is where you spend 90% of your time, and the more you get involved, the better it is.
Today, Haworth still embraces its original principles of small-town flavor, peaceful dwellings, and commitment to residential living. We hope you've enjoyed looking back at Haworth, one of Bergen County's most admired towns. Thanks for joining me. I'm Maria Eichler. Good night.